Good evening. Welcome to the Center for the Arts. My name is Dr. Andrew Mark Sauerwein, as some of you know. You might not have recognized me because I got a haircut. Welcome to tonight's concert. We're pleased to have Dr. Scott Carrell coming from Harding University to perform for us. He has a varied program, as you probably see from your program, including a work of his own. And on top of that, you will find a handout which has some notes on it. He's going to be talking during the program about many of his pieces, including that one, and desires that you have the handout in place so that you can look and see some of what he's going to be talking about and discussing. Very vibrant, lively person, and a great pianist. We're very glad that you're here. Before we begin, please pray with me. Lord, we give you thanks that you give us the gift of music, that we can enjoy it, and we pray for your blessing on our time here together tonight, that you would fill us with wonder and excitement and curiosity about the music being made. We pray for Dr. Carrell as he performs, that you would give him a sense of peace. And we pray for the audience here that we would be prepared to receive the gift of music that you give us. We thank you for this opportunity and pray for your blessing on this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Before we begin, I would like to remind you of a couple of things. One, please make sure your cell phones are off or silenced. Another one is that we invite you not to make any flash photography or recording of the program tonight. We are already taking care of that. You can look on the back of your program, by the way. You will see a list of events. We have several more concerts coming later in the semester, and we want to invite you to check that out and go to the arts calendar on the Belhaven website for more information, or call the music department. We'd be glad to assist you if we could. One last thing, I would request that while you are in the building, you keep your masks on and up over your mouth. After the concert, you will be able to meet with the pianist out in the foyer in the back. Please come and greet him. Also, he will have some CDs for sale and would be pleased for you to purchase them. Cash or a personal check will work, or you can pick up an order form and order some things that can be shipped to you. So once again, thank you for coming and enjoy the concert.
Good evening, and welcome. Thank you for coming to this program. It's entitled Explorations in Piano Music. And the reason why I've given it that title is these works are, for the most part, unknown or rarely played, perhaps, and I thought it made a really nice collection of pieces. And, well, truth be told, actually, I kind of got all the pieces together and then sort of came up with a theme, and so here you have it. Anyway, we're going to begin tonight with one of the great composers of the classical era, Franz Joseph Haydn, the father of the symphony, father of the string quartet. He wrote 62 piano sonatas, but unfortunately, many of these are rarely played. There's a group of the latest sonatas, about 5 or 6, that are somewhat frequently played. There's 1 or 2 others of the middle period pieces that are also performed frequently. There's a D major and an E minor, for example. But this particular sonata is one that I don't know that I've ever heard anyone play. Actually, I was reacquainted with it several years ago when I was at another college, and I was doing a concert and did a master class, and there was a student that played the first movement of this Haydn sonata on the master class. And it kind of reawakened my interest in it. And so last year, in the springtime, after I'd gotten done with my solo recitals and I was trying to decide what new music am I going to learn for next season's programs, and I thought I should learn a new Haydn sonata. It's been a while since I had learned one. And so I dug around and played through several of them, and I kept coming back to this particular sonata. in B minor. And I think the reason is because there's a certain dramatic or theatrical element that is present in this particular work. It almost reminds me of Mozart's music, kind of funny in that way. Mozart, of course, everything sounds operatic, very theatrical. And in some ways, this piece has those kinds of elements also. So we have three movements. So the first movement is a standard sonata form. For those of you who are music theory geeks, you'll understand what that is. So there's several themes that are presented and lots of drama and such. The second movement is a minuet and trio, a dance form, which Haydn frequently used in his symphonies and string quartets, and even the piano works as well. And then the last movement is another sonata form movement as it is, but we go back to that dark minor key drama, if you will, that's pervasive through the first and last movements. It's interesting because there's really not a slow movement to this particular work. Oftentimes we think of the piano sonata as being a fast movement, a slow movement, and then another fast one. But Haydn didn't always do that. Mozart didn't always do that, actually. Beethoven even has at least one example or a couple of examples of two-movement sonatas. So all of these composers were playing around with the expectations and sort of the definitions of what we think of in these kinds of pieces. And it really creates a lot of wonderful, wonderful music. So here we go. This will be the Haydn Sonata in B minor. makes a lot of noise if it's already on, live on the stand. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That's really a fabulous work. My wife is a trumpet player, actually. She married her accompanist. And, yeah, that was supposed to be funny. Okay. Anyway, she, of course, has played and is very familiar and taught the Haydn trumpet concerto. And so she hasn't heard much of the piano music, the piano sonatas. And so when I played this at Harding last week, she really liked this work. And I think, it's because of the dramatic elements. We're going to turn our attention to another fabulous composer for the piano, Frédéric Chopin, and a really unusual composer in that he's one of the few that have focused his attentions and his creative writing almost exclusively for our instrument, the piano. And, we're so much better for that. I mean, so many wonderful works that he wrote. And so last year, again, when I was contemplating what would I begin, what am I going to do? What am I going to play for next year? I decided, I should learn a new Chopin work. Because, there's some great things, and I've played a number of his pieces, but there's always more, one can encounter. And so I considered the ballades and the scherzos. Those are pretty good-sized works. But then I thought of the fantasy, and so I got a copy of the music and read through it and thought, yes, this is the work. But I'm wondering why this work is not performed more often. And I think it's because it's a work of somewhat epic proportions. At least it has that quality. I mean, the ballades and the scherzos do too. They have sort of an epic storytelling quality when you encounter those works and listen to them. But the fantasy is a bigger work. It's about twice as long as some of the ballades and scherzos. It's closer to 15 minutes. Many of those are 7, 8, 9 minutes. And so on one hand, this work is longer than those, but it's not as large as, say, the piano sonatas that Chopin wrote. And so it kind of falls in the middle there, and I think maybe that's part of the reason why it's not performed perhaps as much. For me, I do have a connection, though, with my teacher in my undergraduate, because I remember her performing this work at some point. I don't remember if it was while I was in college or if it was during high school, because I did study with her in high school as well. And so just a wonderful work. So it does sort of tell a story. A fantasy, by the way, is an old concept. It's been around at least since probably the Renaissance. We have pieces called that. And oftentimes, at least in the more modern era and stuff, it's a really very free composition. The composer pretty much does anything they want, whatever according to their fancy, a very similar word. So in this piece, what you're going to hear is an opening section that sounds like a march, but a slower march. And in my mind, it's almost as if there are two opposing armies that are marching towards some battlefield. And then after some quietness, maybe it's the early morning mist as they're preparing for the battle and such, and then things open up and we get stuff happening and lots of big stuff. There's another faster march in the middle. And then about halfway through the piece, we encounter a slow section of the pieces, and there's no movements, it's all just sections. A slow section, and for me this perhaps is where in sort of the battle has died down for the day, and now the soldiers have returned to their camps, and it's nighttime, and perhaps a soldier is reminiscing or thinking about his loved one back at home. Perhaps maybe that's what that middle section is. But then, of course, naturally, then all of a sudden somebody starts firing again, and we're at battle once again. Right at the very end, we get, after sort of a big climactic moment, there's a period of almost like a recitative, very quiet, where perhaps again the soldier is remembering something about his loved one or whatever. And then we have sort of a somewhat victorious ending, if you will. Maybe he's thankful, maybe he's offering a prayer, I'm not sure. But you'll know the ending of the piece because there's two chords. And these two chords, by the way, for again, you theory geeks, it's a minor 4 chord going to a major 1. So the 4 chord is borrowed from the minor mode. And this I think is an example of Chopin being the originator of the Hollywood ending. Many of the movies from the 50s, 60s, and 70s are some of the classic movies that we have, some of the orchestral scores, and you listen to those. And this chord is one of those that's used all the time as endings to those movies, or sometimes as part of the introduction, the overture at the beginning, and it ends with these kinds of chords. Anyway, that's the term, the nickname we've given that chord is the Hollywood ending for that particular kind of cadence. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the Chopin Fantasy. Okay, here we go. Next piece. Now, I know this is one that you probably have not heard, primarily because I composed it about 20 years ago, and I'm the only one performing it. So, anyway, I'm glad you're here and you get to experience it. Hey, if we could get the house lights up a little bit more, that might be helpful. So you have a handout, so you'll need that, because I'm going to talk about the piece a little bit and just some of my ideas about how I composed it and what I did. It's based upon a painting, and there's a story reason why I did this, but if you really want to know that, I'll tell you afterwards. But anyway, it's based upon a painting by an Arkansas artist, and his name is Carrell, C-L-O-A-R. He was born in eastern Arkansas in the little town of Earl, right somewhat close to the Mississippi River near Marion, if you know where that is, on Interstate 55. And he was, most of his heyday, I think, of his painting and such was in the 60s, 70s, and some in the 80s. He passed away in the 90s. He was actually quite well known. He had showings in New York City, in Memphis, and other places. In fact, the Brooks Museum in Memphis actually houses several of his paintings, including the one that this is based on. It's his most famous work. It's called Where the Southern Cross the Yellow Dog. And what you see in the painting, I'll describe the painting first, and then sort of the elements musical elements that I got from it. In the painting, it looks like it's a small town USA. In fact, I think it's actually the town of Moorhead, Mississippi, I think is where it is, because what you're seeing is you're looking down like a main street, a dirt road, basically. There's some buildings there, like the center of town. You see a church steeple, there's a water tower that has a name on it. I think that's how we know where he was thinking. And so with that, it's clear skies, maybe a few hazy clouds. So it almost reminds me of those hot summer days in the South. And so from that, I came up with some ideas. I thought of some harmonies, for example. Let me just demonstrate some ideas that you'll hear. Something like this. You might want to turn the microphone off now while I play. So, some chords of like major 9 chords, major 7 chords, other things that are kind of warm and interesting, and there's some minor chords with added tones and such, so it's very rich harmonic language for that idea. Another thing you see in the painting are 2 sets of railroad tracks. One set of tracks goes across the frame of the picture, and then the other one is perpendicular to it that goes from your view all the way line of sight out in the distance. And one of those is named the Southern, the other the Yellow Dog, hence the title of the painting. And so with railroads, what do we get from railroads? Oh, well, you think of energy, movement. You think of noise and rhythm, lots of rhythm, and you think of train whistles and other sounds that go along with the trains. And so from that, I used several different things. So you'll hear the section with a lot of running notes in it that depicts the movement of the trains and so on. And then harmonies are some dissonant harmonies of like 20th century sounds, if you will, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in just a second. The other element I saw in this painting were 2 individuals who were about to walk across the railroad track, one of the railroad tracks, from right to left when you're viewing it, and 2 African Americans. And I thought, oh my goodness, culture there, blues and jazz, what a great fertile field of ideas that one could use. And so I pulled from that idea of the blues and jazz world, both harmonies, some of the really interesting and rich harmonies that come from those styles, and also some melodic ideas that come from that music. So we get things like, oh here, I'll do this. Just bring this over here where that way you don't have to turn it on and off. So we get harmonies like, you got to turn me back on. Okay, there we go. Harmonies like what you might call, what we call in the classical world a split third chord. This is a chord that has the root, the major third, and the minor third above it. Sounds like this. So So we get that clash of that major third and the minor third together in the same harmony, and it really is a cool sound, and many 20th century composers have made use of that. Prokofiev, for one, Kabalevsky, the Russian composers particularly loved that conflict of the major third and the minor third together, and many composers have used that. For me, it also incorporates another element that goes with that, and that's we add one more note in that chord to really make it sound bluesy, the seventh. So when you hear that, it's the basis not only of a lot of things we hear in the blues world, but also even some things that get into the rock and roll, the funk, and other things. So you might get something like this. You may have heard it in this context. So it has some really interesting qualities to it. Now, one of the things I pulled from the harmonies, though, is the fact that in that chord, you have that clash of those two notes, and it's the interval is a major 7, which is really nice because you can do that in all kinds of, and use minor sevenths, and so the interval of a seventh becomes important in the middle part of this piece. Also, another element is that middle note, the one in the middle here. I also use that, but I add an extra note here, so I get a second there. So a seventh with a second in between, and you'll hear that frequently. You'll hear that kind of sound back and forth in the middle of it also. And so that just adds to the sort of intensity and the drama, I hope, of the whole piece. Okay, I think I can put, oh no, I'm gonna need to come back to it. So if you have your handout, you may want to look at that. For those of you that are, again, really interested in this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of the piece, and particularly how did I go about the initial process of composing this work. And so these two elements you see here are actually the melody from the beginning of the piece and then something from closer to the end that I call the thirds. That's kind of my nickname for it. And for some reason, I threw away my original scribblings on manuscript paper for the beginning here, so I would have an exact representation of what did I really write down the very first. But it was basically these two ideas. And so I thought, okay, this melody, this is nice, and I worked and expanded it a little bit and such. But then, and you can see that where the dashed lines show you basically where that melody comes from, section A, the A material. And then one element that I took out of that melody, you see the bracket there in the middle of it, is that little rising figure, and that's used as part of that B idea in section A. You'll hear that used several times, frequently actually. Sounds something like, well, the main melody sounds like this. And then here's the little motive. So that little motive, you'll hear that multiple times in that little B material there. Okay, and then the other part is the down below where you see the thing called thirds. This was another thing I scribbled right at the beginning. And I was looking at and playing through that little excerpt and thinking, okay, this doesn't really sound like the beginning of the work. There's something that doesn't quite fit for starting out and using this material at the very beginning of the piece. So what I realized after a little bit of contemplation was that this little phrase that we see right here really belongs toward the end of the piece, because it sounded to me almost like a summary of some kind. The harmonies, they fit in well with the A section, yes, but those thirds and then the little melodic line, it seemed like there was too much material there to use in that very first little opening A portion. And so I realized, okay, I need to move that to the very end of the piece where it'll be sort of a summary, a pulling together of several ideas, which means I need to pull out of it ideas. So some of the harmonies went to the A section, along with the little melodic idea there that you see, that little rising eighth note figure. But then the thirds, I sort of extracted that and used that or something based upon it in that B portion of the A section. And it worked really well to sort of put it there. And then we'll hear it come back then when we get to return to the A section at the A prime, right before the coda is where you'll see this little snippet that's printed here. And it sounds like sort of just impression of just pieces of the materials you've heard earlier, now sort of all being brought together as a conclusion almost. And so that's one of the things for you budding composers, that's one of the things I would encourage you to do is to, when you write something, is to think about where would this material belong within the piece. Because sometimes what you write, it's like, oh, it's a fantastic opening. But other times, it might be, that doesn't really fit sort of the idea of the opening section, but maybe I could use it in this other portion, maybe in the middle section or some other section, maybe at the very end even, perhaps. And so I think that's one of the important things to learn to do as a composer is to learn to sense what is the music telling you, and very important to do as a composer. So you have the overall structure, as you can see, a large-scale ABA. It's kind of a theme that runs through several of the pieces that I'm currently playing. The A section itself is divided into 3 little subsections, and so you'll hear that, one with this melody on both the A's, and then the third's making prominent use of in the little lowercase b part. The large section B is the one that really makes use of the railroad ideas, the running rhythms. You'll hear running 16th notes most of the way, all the way through that section. But you'll also hear some of those harmonic devices I was talking about, those intervals of the 7th and the seconds and things like that, just all over the place in that material. I think the harmonic language is actually very easy, very accessible, very easy to listen to. It definitely is modern, sort of a modern sense of tonality, if you will, but I think it works really well. So let me talk just a moment then again about the interpretation of the painting and of what did I try to capture in this piece of music. So the painting, small town USA, a couple of individuals, the railroad tracks, and what I thought was, you know, those railroad tracks, they represent a path to the big city. If you've grown up in a small town, you can identify with this emotion. And in fact, I think maybe most of us go through this dilemma several times in our lives. That is, you know, where I am right now is good, it's fine, but I'm not really satisfied. It's really not, I'm not getting to achieve the things I want to achieve or do the tasks that I really feel that I need to be doing. And so, you know, we struggle with that dilemma of, well, do I pack up all my stuff and move somewhere new, maybe overseas, or do I move to a big city or something? And if you're in a small town, particularly the big city represents almost a foreign territory in some ways. And so that train, when the train comes to town, you hear the noise of the train. It comes, it stops, and then it chugs and goes away. And you think, you know, maybe should I be on that train? Should I get on that train and go to the big city? New opportunities, but also uncertainty and anxiety that go with it because you may not know anyone or you may not have a job lined up necessarily. And so every time the train comes to town, you think about that. Should I get on that train? And of course, every time the train leaves, one thinks of, should I have been on that train? And so this element, this sort of uncertainty is what I hope I have captured in the piece of music. And anyway, I hope you enjoy Crossings. Continuing now with our journey through exploring the piano music world, I have had a strong interest in French composers for about 25 years, or more at least, maybe since my doctoral studies. And in fact, I even did my dissertation on some French piano music, the lecture recital that went with it. And so through the years, I have continued to do research, looking particularly for those gems of piano music that are simply unknown or hardly played at all. And so through the years, I have found a number of pieces and have played them, and just really been excited about some of the discoveries that I've made from that. So this next composer is a female composer, a woman composer from France, Germaine Taillefer, and she was part of that generation of composers that came after, basically, Debussy and Ravel. So Debussy and Ravel, they began a lot of their compositions making a name for themselves in the 1890s, but it's really right at the beginning of the 1900s is when both of them started doing some really serious explorations in the piano music and writing for the piano. So the year 1901 is a watershed year, as it turns out. Ravel published Jeu d'eau, which is a fantastic work that combines some of the harmonic elements coming out of the 19th century French Romanticism with the virtuosity of Liszt and a few other elements thrown in. Debussy published his suite Pour le piano with 3 pieces in it as a group, and again, some really remarkable experimentations that he did in that work as well. And then after that, both of them, of course, wrote other great masterpieces of these more advanced harmonic and compositional qualities that they were developing. So while they were doing that, we have a new group of composers, young composers that are growing up, and they are coming of age during World War I. That war was a cataclysmic event for Europe, and really for the world, but particularly for so many things that were happening and had happened in Europe, so many systems in terms of social things and economic things. And so these composers, and this particular group I'm talking about is called Les Six, the Six. They were serious composers, yes, but they also had as a father figure the composer Erik Satie, who was very much not part of the establishment, the conservatories and the schools. And these composers, led by Satie as their figurehead, would thumb their nose at the authorities and the musical establishment. These people played in the cabarets and the taverns and things, and were playing the popular music of the day, ragtime and dance music and other things that were going on as we think of the Roaring '20s. And so these 6 composers were really young at the time. They were 20, 21, maybe 22, or somewhere in that age group. And an enterprising impresario named Jean Cocteau, a promoter, he published an article where he called these 6 young people Les Six. And they actually did a couple of concerts together that year, and even published a small collection of pieces, each composer writing one small piano piece. They published that together. But after that year, they sort of went their separate ways. So this is very much in contrast to, say, the Russian Five, the Mighty Five that we talk about in Russian literature from the 19th century. Those 5 composers in Russia, they had common goals, common aims. They were wanting to create a Russian-sounding music, something that wasn't just an import from France or Germany, but something that had a Russian quality. And that's what they really strove to do, and they spent a number of years doing that. And they shared their ideas and were really a group together for quite a while. But these 6 French composers were not. They didn't have common goals or common aims. They simply sort of were together for a brief period, about a year, and then they went down their own paths, following different things. So it's kind of funny that we call them a group when they kind of really weren't. Anyway, probably the most popular composer out of that group of 6 is probably Francis Poulenc, who wrote choral music and art songs and piano music, a wonderful, very unique kind of quality to his style. And I love playing his music. In fact, I did one on my program last night at Mississippi College. I played one of his suites. And really delightful music. Another composer's name you might recognize is Milhaud, Darius Milhaud. He wrote a ton of music. and did a lot of interesting things as well. Well, the only female in this group was Germaine Taillefer. She had quite a long career, was well respected, and wrote music for a number of things and was recognized. And so I was digging around in my research some time ago, and I came across this piece, this romance that she had written. And I don't know if I would say it's her masterpiece, probably not. There's a partita and there's some other works that probably are more important in terms of her style and in terms of the literature. But this piece was so charming and so delightful and so nicely written that I just had to learn it. And it uses the harmonies, say, of maybe a Fauré, some of the Fauré of the late 19th century, before he got to his later period where he's doing some more experimental things. And so some wonderful harmonies, just lovely melodies. It's just, I don't know, delightful is the best word I know to describe it. So anyway, this is the Taillefer Romance. Oh, it's just such a charming piece. I really enjoyed it. My wife really liked it when she first heard it several years ago when I played it. We turn our attention now to one of the really long-living composers in France, Camille Saint-Saëns. And if you notice on the program, he actually had an anniversary last year, which is part of the reason why I chose to play some music by him. So back in, during the pandemic, beginning of the pandemic in 2019, I suppose it was in spring of 20, I was looking ahead to the year 21 and thinking, what am I going to play on my recitals and performances for the spring semester? And so I thought, I need to do something of Saint-Saëns. So I went through and listened to all 4 CDs of his piano solo music and tried to find something that really appealed, and I did. I found a virtuoso work called the Allegro Appassionato. And it was really quite a wonderful work, lots of running notes and big chords and so on. And then I thought, I need to play something lyrical by Saint-Saëns also, just as a contrast. I mean, he wrote some beautiful melodies and such. So again, I thought about some of the pieces I had heard. He wrote mazurkas and some waltzes. There's an etude that he's really well known for as well, one particular etude of many. And nothing really struck my fancy. So I finally decided, okay, let's go with something that everybody recognizes, not for piano solo, but let's find a version of The Swan from the Carnival of the Animals, his most popular work, actually. And I have played it. We've done the work at Harding with 2 pianos on stage. My colleague and I were playing the piano parts, and it was just so much fun. And so I found several transcriptions that had been done of this movement, The Swan, but when I played through them, I didn't really like them so much. I mean, of course, they were well done as transcriptions go, but they were sort of too much their own entity. They didn't really seem to be true to the original quality that Saint-Saëns had written in the music. And so I decided at that time, then this is in 2020, beginning of the pandemic, I decided then to make my own transcription of this movement. And so I used as reference those others that I had seen, or at least parts of them at least, and then worked through and figured out how I wanted to make it work and all of that. And so I feel like that in some ways I have done pretty well with capturing sort of the qualities of the way the original version sounds. And that's, I hope you'll enjoy that and that you'll recognize that too. Of course, you've got a beautiful melody, you've got these accompaniments that are just flowing things underneath it. And one of the things you'll find in this piece is that it has this quality we call the 3- and 4-handed effect. We think of particularly 19th century works, a lot of transcriptions of Liszt and other composers, where it features a melody that's in the middle of the texture, and you've got all these arpeggios and other things going on up and down around the melody. And so it's the kind of thing you watch the pianist play this and say, he must have 3 or 4 hands to play all those notes, hence the name of it. And so obviously, trying to give a nod to the great history of transcriptions, I have incorporated some of that quality as well, but partly because I needed to make this particular work happen and to make it, I think, successful. At least I hope so. Here's Saint-Saëns, The Swan. Well, we're coming to the end of our journey, our explorations. Thank you so much for coming tonight and sharing all this great music with me. And I hope you've enjoyed some things. Maybe something particular has touched you in some way. And I hope it's blessed you in some way. Our final composer is one that's probably obscure to, well, most everybody. His name's Noël Galland. He was a teacher at the Paris Conservatory. In fact, if you Google his name, most likely you'll come up with the fact that he was the teacher of this great composer of the mid-20th century. And of this composer, there was a whole group of composers that are really well known in the middle of the 20th century who studied with him during the 1930s and 40s and into the 50s. He was a composer. He taught solfege and harmony at the conservatory, and his brother Jean was also a composer as well, but they're very little known. No one really knows much about them. I first encountered him in my dissertation research, and in fact I included a piece of his, a sonatine, in my dissertation, and I played the first movement of that piece on my lecture recital. So about 10 or 12 years ago, I decided I was, again, trying to decide what to play on the next year's programs. And I thought, I should dig that piece out and play the entire work. It's only about 13 minutes long, all three movements. So I did, and I was just so taken with that piece that I decided to really look and explore more to see what else he had really written. And so I ordered scores and started reading through his pieces and finding all these charming things and played several of them on recitals. And of course, in all of my research, going way back to my dissertation time and all the way to the present, I had been looking for recordings of his piano solo music. If you look him up on YouTube, you'll find recordings of his woodwind music. I think particularly there's a piece for flute and piano and bassoon and piano that are very popular and played frequently by our woodwind friends. But the piano music, there simply were no recordings. I didn't come across any, so I thought, aha, a project for me, yes. So over the course of several years, I worked on his pieces, I did recording sessions, and in the fall of 2016, I completed my project of a compact disc of his piano music. It's not everything he wrote. There were some things I didn't particularly like, but these were pieces that really appealed to me. And his style is, again, that sort of modern sense of tonality. A lot of these pieces were written perhaps in the 1940s. The sonatine was published in 1931, but I don't know if he wrote them all in a burst right at the end of the 40s, maybe after World War II, or if they had just sat around on a shelf for a decade or so. But right around 1951 to 53, he published a bunch of his music, and then also another work in 1960. And so these are the works that appear on the CD. There's the sonatine, there's a brief sonata, there's 10 preludes, and then there's some other individual pieces, some things that are actually upper intermediate level or maybe early advanced, just really charming little wonderful pieces. So again, being a teacher of harmony means that he really understands harmony in so many ways, and he finds very creative ways of using his harmonies and in different ways all the way through. And so you'll hear a lot of this in this particular work, this Capriccio. It's, again, going with that theme of large-scale ABA. So we have an opening A section, which features running 16th notes in the right hand and supporting material in the left hand, chords. The middle section, the B section, has running notes in the left hand, with the right hand having a melody. And then the A section comes back to make a reappearance afterwards. And then right at the end, there's a coda, which brings back a little bit of that running material from the middle section, the B section. And one of the interesting things about this, see, you didn't know you were going to get a music history lecture today, but here you are. And one of the interesting things in this B section in the middle is the fact that he has the melody in the right hand is written as a 9/8 measure, and so 9 pulses of eighth notes. But underneath that, the left hand has 2 measures of 2/4 with running 16ths. So you get 16 16th notes over the course of the 9/8 notes in the right hand. And it's one of those cross rhythms that just really is a puzzle, and one has to really work with it. So it took me some time and some working with it to sort of figure out how the coordination worked with those. And for those of you budding pianists out there, here's a little tip for you. Whenever you have these cross rhythms with this kind of a situation, running notes in one hand and then something else, get the right hand going where it's really steady and accurate, and then just turn the left hand loose and let it go. Yeah, and so, no, sometimes that works. Anyway, you'll have to do it. Anyway, Galland is one of those composers that I've enjoyed playing and have played several of his pieces over the years. And so recently, or the last couple of years, I had decided to pull back out this Capriccio and to play it. And it's just a really charming work. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's program, and I hope you enjoy Galland's Capriccio.